Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Flourish FM, a podcast for the good life. Our guest today is Dr. Annie Duke. Annie is an author, speaker, and consultant in the decision-making space. She loves to dive deep into decision-making under uncertainty. Her latest obsession is on the topic of quitting. In particular, she is on a mission to rehabilitate the term quitting and get people to be proud of walking away from things. Annie is the author of two bestsellers, Quit, The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away, and Thinking in Bets. As a former professional poker player, she has won more than $4 million in tournament poker. During her career, Annie won a World Series of Poker bracelet and is the only woman to have won the World Series of Poker Tournament of Champions and the NBC National Poker Heads Up Championship. Annie retired from poker in 2012. Prior to becoming a professional poker player, she was awarded a National Science Foundation Fellowship to study cognitive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned her master's degree. In 2023, Annie completed her PhD in cognitive psychology. Annie is the co-founder of the Alliance for Decision Education, a non-profit whose mission is to improve lives by empowering students through decision skills education. Now, as you can tell from all this, Annie is a true world expert in decision making, and we discuss what it means to make a good decision in this episode and why it's important to focus on the process of decision making rather than just on the outcome, which is where which what Annie's research has shown, we tend to focus on the outcome rather than the process, and what is one of the reasons why we tend to make bad decisions. We then focus our conversation on how to make better decisions concerning our future happiness. Research has shown that we tend to make bad decisions about what makes us happier. This is due to problems with something called affective forecasting, our lack of ability to make good decisions about our future happiness. And she describes an effective process for making better decisions about the kind of things that will bring us greater happiness in the future, and gives us some excellent practical exercises that we can put into action right away. For example, speaking to people that are close to us in our lives about how they think we'll feel in the future if we make some particular decision now about something that we're thinking about making, something that's really important to us. She also describes the current book she's working on, which is due out in June this year, June 2026. And there's a ton of other stuff she describes, such as the one thing that she's found has made her most happy in recent years, based on advice from one of our other guests, Laurie Santos. It's a fascinating conversation. We hope you love it. This is Decision Making and Knowing When to Walk Away with Dr. Annie Duke. Annie, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm so good. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for asking.
Great, thanks.
Let's just start off with this. Why is the process of making a decision more important than the outcome?
The reason why the process is more important is because, to use a fancy word, the world is stochastic.
Mm-hmm.
And all that means is that for any given decision that you make, there's some set of outcomes that are associated with it, and each of those outcomes have some probability of occurring. Which outcome you actually observe is due to luck. You don't have any control over the outcome that you actually observe. So when you make a decision, there's a set of outcomes that are associated with it. Some of them are good and some of them are bad at some probability, right? Each of them.
Sure.
I could make a decision where I'm going to observe a bad outcome 5% of the time. And by definition, I'm going to observe that outcome 5% of the time. Just definitionally speaking, I could, in the reverse, make a decision where I'm going to observe a good outcome 5% of the time. And 5% of the time, I'm going to observe a good outcome. So we can make decisions that kind of go four ways. I could make a decision that's good on average, right? That I've selected a good option compared to the other options I might select, and I could get a good outcome, right? So there, the outcome quality and decision quality are in alignment. I made a good decision. I got a good outcome. I can also make a good decision and get a bad outcome. Again, because the world is stochastic, right? Like, it's not deterministic. There isn't only one outcome associated with an option that I choose. So you could think about that as like, I'm driving along, the light is green. I go through the green light. Someone comes the other way and hits me, right? I made a perfectly good decision. I was following the laws I was going the speed limit. I went through the green light, not even a yellow, and I got in an accident anyway. That happens, right? Then we could make a decision that's pretty bad, where the payoffs are going against us. And let me just define what we mean by a bad decision. Nick, you may have some goal that you want to achieve and you have values, right? So a good decision for you would be choosing an option that advances you toward your goals that are that is in alignment with your values in comparison to other options that you might have chosen, right? So that's how we define a good decision. So a good decision for you, Nick, might be different than a good decision for John, because you might have different goals, you may have different values, right? So I care about you personally. Are you advancing toward your goals in alignment with your values? So you make a decision that's pretty bad, meaning you're making a decision that's going to cause you to lose ground from your goals. But you could get a good outcome from that, because we're talking about sort of what's happening on average, right? So you could go through a red light. I've done it by accident, and you can get through perfectly safely, right? So you can get a good outcome. Or you can make a decision that's pretty bad on average and actually get a bad outcome. You could go through a red light and you could get in an accident. So we have to think about the fact that all four of those quadrants are available to us. So this is why we can't just look at outcome quality and say, well, that tells us everything we need to know about the decision, because it can't possibly, right? So instead, we have to go back and look at what's the process. Were you thinking about your goals? Were you thinking about your values? Were you doing some calculations and forecasting of what the possible outcomes were? Did you forecast what the probability of those things were? Did you ask for outside opinions? Did you look for the outside view? Meaning, did you look up a base rate, for example? What happens in general in situations that you're considering? Did you interpret the data correctly? That's where this next book comes in. And if we can go back and look at that process, I can actually say, well, Nick, like you went through a red light. I know you got a bad outcome, but this looks like a red light decision. Or you went through a green light and this looks like a green light decision, right? And so I can go back and look. With something like going through traffic lights, we've already agreed on things, right? So we know that green lights are good and red lights are bad. With decision making, it's a little bit harder to tell because we have uncertainties around, what information do we know or don't we know? It's not necessarily settled science whether something is a good or bad decision. So we have to be very careful about process, because we can't just rely on kind of what we know to be true.
So that sounds like, and now I'm going to tie in your cog psych background here and training a little bit, because that sounds like a lot of CBT and a lot of ACT and a lot of like, if I'm trying to evaluate a good or bad decision, it's not about, let's call it tangible outcome, because I do think there's an outcome you're alluding to here that's really important, and it sounds like coherence. It sounds like congruence, like you're removing affect in some ways. Doesn't really matter how you feel. Doesn't really matter what the outcome is, because you don't have total control of that. What you do have some control over is trying to forecast and stay coherent with those values, because that internally is going to maybe rupture us or maintain a foundation. Is that a somewhat fair summary?
Yeah, I think when we get back to like what's the definition of a good decision, right? So this is kind of the way that I put it in like the simplest form. There's only two things that determine the way that our life turns out. One is luck. And luck has a very strong influence on the way your life turns out. As an example, you were born at a certain time to certain parents in a certain country.
Mm-hmm.
You are a certain height. You can run fast or slow, right? Like there's all these things that at the moment of your birth determine what the distribution of outcomes that are even available to you are, right? Like I think about for myself, as a woman, right? Like if I'd been born in 1600, what does my life look like compared to being born in the late 20th century, right?
Sure.
And I missed the part. I just missed it where like secretary wife, that was the expectation.
Mm-hmm.
So like in 1600, I would have been property. So, we can go back to that moment and say, oh my gosh, like even there's so much luck and we have no control over that. So the question then is, do you just kind of go, like you become a nihilist, right? Like, is that what happens?
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, my head went to nihilism pretty quick.
Right.
I was going to ask you about
and
that.
And the answer is no, because there's another thing that determines how your life turns out, and that's the quality of your decisions. And that's a big deal. Because when we think about it, you're born, you have a distribution of outcomes that are available to you. The quality of your decisions is what determines where you end up in that distribution. Can you push yourself out to the right tail, the better end of the distributions? On average, yes. Right? That doesn't mean that you couldn't make a great decision and get a bad outcome. But what we have to realize is the better decisions that you make, and you make thousands of them a day, the better decisions you make, on average, the better the outcomes that are associated with those decisions, which means on average, your life is going to turn out better. And I think that that's actually a really positive message, which is lean into the uncertainty, accept it. It's actually part of great decision making. You can't be a great decision maker without accepting the uncertainty, because then you get into all sorts of things of thinking you control things more than you do. It's harder to be sanguine about bad outcomes. It's harder to recover from them because you become more emotionally charged, right? You become more upset about them. You feel like you should have been able to avoid them. Why did that happen, right? As opposed to saying, look, the world is an uncertain place. It's okay. I'm going to lean into really focusing on how do I make better decisions? How do I learn more from the things that happen and the past decisions that I've made? How do I do that better? Because that is a thing that I can control. And that's the thing that I ought to be focusing on.
Hi, friends. Nick here with just a brief interlude to share with you an update on one of our newest partnerships with the Anti-Fragile Academy. Throughout John and I's conversations with many, if not most, of our guests, one thing has been made really clear. In order for people to flourish, thrive, experience the good life, they need to develop the capacity to not only navigate and endure, but ideally grow from the bad, grow from unpleasant experiences. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with our newest sponsor, the Anti-Fragile Academy, an organization that I co-founded with Dr. Adam Wright, Director of Mental Performance for the Washington Nationals. At the Anti-Fragile Academy, we work with adolescent athletes, executives, and educators to help them understand some of the science, not just of optimal performance, but of well-being and anti-fragility. The ability not only to endure and bounce back from unpleasantness, but to actually come back stronger, to grow from it. Between Adam and I, we've worked with Fortune 100 companies, Inc. 300 executives, Division I programs, and elite professional athletes and Olympians from all over the world. To find out more about how you can leverage anti-fragility training, check out our website at theantifragileacademy.com.
So this brings us very nicely to connects very clearly with the theme of this podcast, human flourishing. So
right.
You mentioned that this is something that can really improve our lives, and it's one of the key things, fundamental things within our control to improve our lives. So how is focusing on decision processes and improving them rather than focusing on decision outcomes and, really embracing that as a key thing we can control, and it really has a big influence on how well we live our lives. How has that shaped your own decision making about some of the key areas that lead to human flourishing, such as happiness, fulfillment, life satisfaction, relationships, all these key areas that are included in theories of flourishing?
Well, I think what I would ask you is, do you think you're happy if you feel that the world happens to you? I mean, I think at the core, you have to get down to that core idea,
Mhm.
right? Do you feel like you're an agent in your own life?
Mhm.
Do you feel like the world happens to you? Because I don't think that you can find happiness if you feel like the world just happens to you.
Mhm.
So I think that's just like at its core incredibly important.
Yeah.
I also don't think you can find happiness in the reverse if you think you have complete control over everything that happens to you. Because you will be sorely disappointed in your life then. You will be sad. When we think we have more control than we actually do, that is also a way to not flourish,
Mhm.
right? Because we beat ourselves up. We more likely to think that we made mistakes. Like, I think that sort of leaning into this idea that yes, the world is an uncertain place, but I am an agent in that world. And there's all sorts of things that I don't have control over, but there are things that I do. And the choices that I make can change things for me because they can change the distribution of outcomes that I might observe. I think that that's a way to actually flourish, right? Because you're focused on the right thing. And I think that you're much more tolerant of the bad things that happen. And you have a much better assessment of the good things that do, which I think is helpful.
Mhm.
The second thing, back to Nick's point, is that in order to flourish, I think you have to live a life that aligns with your values. And you can't live a life that aligns with your values. Well, let's put it this way. You can't make decisions that align with your values unless you really think about it, right? You have to have good process around that. You have to identify what your values are.
Mhm.
You have to think about, like, given different options, how do these align with the things that I care about? How do these align with my values? What are my goals? Are those goals worthwhile? If I set a goal 10 years ago, is it still the right goal for me? Should I be switching, right? Should I abandon that because I don't want my identity to be wrapped up in something that isn't good for me? And that's part of good decision process as well. And if we persist in things that are no longer good for us, we won't flourish. But again, you have to sort of give into this idea that things change, not just the world that might offer you information that you should, do something different, but also you change, which is part of good process. How have I changed?
Mhm.
How have my values changed
Mhm.
so that I can make decisions that align with what those things are? And I just think that this is like such an incredibly important point is that you neither want to think the world happens to you, nor that you have total control. And both of those are a recipe for not flourishing.
It sounds like the difference between learned helplessness and positive illusions, right? The
Yes,
extreme ends of an optimism and like
yes,
pessimism spectrum. And
yes,
you want to deploy both thoughtfully, strategically in some way,
right.
shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
How do you take that framing, because it's very useful, and bring it to something like quitting and good decision making around quitting? Because I think I would guess, I know it's part of the issue for me with any, let's call it social situation, right? How much do I think I can actually impact this, right? Realistically, will my action have an impact versus, it's kind of the opportunity cost. I only have so much
Right.
time, energy, motivation, all of those things. I'm trying to figure out how to distribute them. And whether it's a social situation or professional situation or work, do I want to persist? Do I want to dig in despite the uncertainty, despite the questions or ambiguity around the level of control? Do I want to keep going, or is it and I hesitate to say good decision because you've kind of detached us from outcome, right? But how am I going to evaluate whether that's right or wrong? Is it simply values aligned, or does outcome matter a bit?
Um, so look, I think it's values aligned, which means that kind of long run outcome matters. So let me explain what I mean, right? We're trying to achieve our goals. As we learn new information, the question is, did we learn something new that tells us that we're on a path that isn't actually going to get us the thing that we want? So you could make a really good decision, right? Like you could be thinking about different ways to make social impact. Okay. And you could say, like, I have time for only one of these things. And from where I'm standing now, I think that this thing is going to help me to achieve the greatest social impact. And obviously, so it's the social impact that you want, that you think is going to make you happy. Okay. So that might be different again than what John might choose. Okay. But you've chosen an option. Because we're making decisions under uncertainty, two forms of uncertainty. One is we know very little in comparison to all there is to be known. The other is luck. Right. So because of that, once you choose an option, you're going to learn new information. Definitionally speaking, there's no decision that you've, and I think that you can do the thought experiment. But let me think about this. Let me think on my past decisions. Has there ever been a decision you made where you didn't learn stuff after the fact? Of course, the answer is no, right? So there's a couple of things that could happen in your hypothetical, right? One is you could achieve that impact and realize that that's not actually the impact. It's not making you happy. And that's okay. Because even when we're thinking about what our own goals are, or what we're going to value, or what makes us happy, we're still forecasting that. We're forecasting about that about a fundamentally different person that's going to occur in the future. Sometimes we get it wrong. And
Sure.
that's fine. Right. And I think that people will sort of persist in that because it becomes like they treat it as a discontinuity in their identity. But I think that, again, to use the word flourish, if we really want to flourish, we need to recognize that some of the stuff we learn is stuff about ourselves. And that's okay. That's part of growth. Right. So it may turn out that it wasn't for you. Like a simple example that I'll give is someone might be like, I want to get a job because I want to make the most money. You know, and a lot of people feel that way. Like, I want to be rich. Like, when I'm really rich, then I'll be happy. And they go take a job that makes the most money. And it turns out that they find out they're missing something. It could be some sense of purpose or fulfillment, or, you know, time away from their family is making them unhappy. And in that case, like, okay, I'm going to, you know, maybe that wasn't my number one thing. I guessed as someone fresh out of college that was. But then I experienced something different and I learned something new. Okay, so that could be one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is that you could say, I think this option is going to achieve the greatest impact that I'm trying to achieve. And then you do it and it turns out it's not that impactful. And that's okay too, because that was a forecast. And then you say, okay, it's not actually creating the impact that I thought it would. Let me go think about some of those other things I considered, or maybe there's something new on the horizon that will actually change things more in the way that I want to change things, in the way that I want to have an impact on the world. So there you might shift, because you just find out, like, you know what? I didn't know that people were so intractable in their beliefs. And here I was, like, doing this stuff, like, you know, trying to get people to change their beliefs. And it turns out they're really intractable. So I need to think about something different. I actually didn't forecast that. Right. So that's fine too. Another thing is that you could have made a really good decision and then bad luck happens. Right. So as an example, let's imagine that it's back in the 90s and you're like, oh, I want to start a business. And you open up a pager business. You know, at some point, 10, 15 years later, cell phones come along.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, okay, you don't know that at the time. That's just the thing that occurred. And hopefully you switch from your pager business at that point. You switch, but that can happen with questions like yours, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's the first thing, is like, how are we updating based on the new stuff that we learn, so that we can actually properly assess, like, is this the path that we're on, without feeling that discontinuity of identity that I think is, like, super challenging for us. And one of the biggest tricks to being able to do this well is to understand that when we're in the moment of challenge, right? Meaning when we're facing down and confronting that information that says, you know what, I chose this path. I thought this was going to have the greatest impact. Now I've learned this new information that maybe it's not. When we're in that moment of facing down that information is when we feel the most challenge to our identity. And that is the moment that it will be hardest for us to stop. Because we want to advance our self-narrative in a positive way. Like it's actually very core to us as humans being happy, right? Is we want to feel good about ourselves, and these challenges that that are threatening a discontinuity to our identity or having to momentarily feel bad about ourselves are very hard.
Mm-hmm.
What's not hard is to imagine, okay, well, what if I stay on this path? Let me imagine like it's 2 months from now. So now we're thinking about a version of us in the future. And we say, let's imagine it's 2 months from now. And you know what? This isn't working out the way I thought. Like the impact isn't great. I'm not happy. Why do I think that is? Write those things down. Here are the reasons why I think this is. And then say, if I observe those things, I'm going to switch. And it just turns out that, and there's neurological reasons for this, that doing this exercise of mental time travel reduces that challenge, right? It reduces that threat in a way that allows us to actually follow through and switch to opportunities that are going to cause us to flourish more.
Mm.
So you have to I don't think that it's realistic to tell somebody, forget about your identity, forget about it. When you observe something that you should stop, just stop. Can some people do it better than others? Probably, but I think it's kind of unrealistic to expect people to actually behave rationally in that situation. There's too many forces that are kind of working against us there. But if in that moment where you're pondering stopping, and you probably won't, say, okay, like it's 2 months from now, let me imagine that I'm not happy and I don't feel like I'm making an impact, and I kind of wish that I had chosen other paths. Right? What are the signals that are causing you to feel that way? Like, what are you observing? Write those things down and commit to those. And if you commit to those with other people in particular, like you make a pact, you're more likely to actually follow through. Why? Because following through on things also makes us feel good. So in a weird way, you're following through on quitting something. And that allows us to protect our identity. It allows us to continue to advance that narrative in a positive way.
Thank you. So let's
I
try.
hope that all makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And let's try and tie. There's a few strands here together. Let's try and tie them together. So you mentioned forecasting that's an important point you make in your book, Quit.
Yeah.
That quitting is, you're right, is ultimately a forecasting problem. Meaning that when to quit is a problem of whether the future looks dire, not whether the present is dire, and a rosy present is a hard thing to walk away from. And you've also mentioned this fascinating view that making the right decisions about happiness is ultimately about trying to figure out, or having at least a rough understanding that some things are within our control to enable us to become happier, and some things aren't.
Yeah.
Now, a problem that we've learned about with several of our guests is that a problem with becoming happier and building happiness is effective forecasting, that we tend to make bad decisions about our future selves, about how we'll feel in response to something. Like when I, earn a certain amount of money or buy a new house, whatever, I'll become much happier. And people get there and like, oh, I thought it'd be better than this. How might you tie together those three strands, that happiness is on this spectrum between knowing what's in our control and what's outside it, that decision-making about things such as quitting and other areas too is ultimately a forecasting problem, and that we're bad at effective forecasting to make better decisions about the kinds of things that will make us happier?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to what I actually just said about, in Nick's example, right? You think, okay, if I make this particular social impact, right, then I'm going to be joyful about it, and that's going to make me really happy. Or if I get a job that's going to make me the most amount of money, that's my path to happiness. So one of the things I think that's hard for people to intuit is that we actually aren't necessarily great judges of what our values are, what we value, right? The things that are going to bring us the greatest utility, which is like a fancy word for happiness. Okay. So we need to be flexible And to understand that, right? That as we learn new information in the future, sometimes what we learn is, wait a minute, I thought this was going to be good, but it's not. And when we learn that new information, we want to make the switch. All right. But we tend to be pretty bad at it again, because that still creates this sort of, discontinuity, right? For us, like, oh, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have started this in the first place. I'm a bad decision maker. I goofed. All these things that kind of make us feel bad. And also, wait a minute, what does that mean for me? Right? I want to have continuity of my identity. Right? It's one of the reasons why it's hard for people to change their beliefs, because it creates this discontinuity, and we want to feel consistent across time. But we aren't. Like, we're individuals that grow. It's part of the uncertainty, and we're individuals that we discover things about ourselves. So by using this mental forecasting, it actually doesn't conflict with the idea that we're bad at affective forecasting. So affective forecasting is what makes us happy. This mental time travel that I'm asking you to do is, imagine it's 2 months from now and you're unhappy. Why? So you're making some guesses. Is it going to be perfect? No. Will there be surprises in there? Of course. But you're going to be better for having thought about it, right? So you say, okay, I take this job and it's 3 months from now and I'm miserable. Why do I think that is? And you write that down. It would be great if I talk to people who know me. I can say, hey, Nick and John, and I can ask you to do this separately. Like, I'm taking this job. Here's the job. It's 3 months from now and I'm miserable. Could you just take some time to write down on a piece of paper, like, why do you think I would be unhappy? What do you think would be happening? And I want you to think in two categories, like, think that might be happening in the world, which could be the job itself, right? Like, things about the job, but also maybe things about me. Right. And then I can get your answers. Right. And then I can figure out, like, okay, let me write these things down. And now I can watch for them. I can try to see what those things are. So it's actually helping you with that affective forecasting stuff, because what it's saying is you're making the choice right now for what you think is best for you and what you think is going to achieve you the greatest happiness. But we're building into that decision that you might learn new stuff. And you could learn new stuff, one, that the world is telling you that this isn't helping you to achieve your goals. But other things you might learn is that, wait, this actually doesn't make me happy. I thought it would, but it doesn't.
So do you recommend that people, when they're faced with a big decision and they're not sure what to do, they follow that kind of process? They pick a timestamp that's in the future, but not so far that it's hard to imagine what your life would be like then. 3 months, a quarter of the year, good time point. Then speak to a certain amount of people. How many would you suggest? 3 people that know you well, to have different perspectives on you?
Yeah, I mean, and you just think about, I don't care how many people you speak to, as long as you think they're going to have a good perspective. So there's different ways for people to have good perspectives. One is they may know you very well, but you have to ask them to do it independently, because people who love you don't disagree. It's uncomfortable to disagree with someone. The other thing is, you could think about someone who's more of a mentor type of role, right? So a mentor might tell you that it's unreasonable for you to be happy after you enter a new position if you haven't been promoted in 6 months. Just as an example, right? So that would be another person, a been there, done that type of person, even if they don't know you well, might actually have a great opinion, right? So that might actually be incredibly helpful for you to go and get that information from. Again, don't do it as a conversation. Ask them to write it down, because you don't want that friction of sort of wanting to mind meld and come together and agree with each other, right? And for people to soft pedal stuff, right? Just let them give their answer. What I think is really interesting about this process is I've seen a few things happen that I think are really interesting. I was coaching somebody who was thinking about shutting a business down. And I said, well, how long are you okay with the situation as it stands? And they said 6 months. And so I said, okay, imagine 6 months from now, and we did this process. Things are going horribly. You've decided you need to shut it down. What's true? And he wrote all those things down. And an amazing thing happened. He said, wait, all of those things have already occurred. Shut it down that week. So got to that decision 6 months earlier by this process. Had he not done the process, he would have continued on. and kept making excuses and so on and so forth. But when I actually had him do that forecasting, and he said, well, what would be true that would cause me to want to shut this down in 6 months? He said, oh my gosh, that's all true now, right there. I need to stop, right? It's a great thing to do before you make a decision. When you're trying to balance out different options, take each option and say, it's however long from now. And I'm really unhappy I chose this option. Things have turned out badly. Why do I think that is? It can help you actually to decide among options because it puts you into that forecasting mode. Because obviously, in order to answer those questions, you have to be forecasting what the future might look like. Why am I having you focus more on the bad things that might occur? Because we're all optimists by nature, right? We all tend to think everything's going to work out great.
Yeah.
So I like people to focus on the bad things that might happen. And then the third category of things that occur is that you don't quit then, and you do start the option, right? And you choose the option and you go ahead, but it allows you, when the world gives you information that you ought to pivot, it gets you to that pivot more quickly. On average, not always, but on average. And I think that all of those things are really good because, your life is the total of the opportunities that are given to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're spending time on something that is causing you to lose ground in terms of achieving your goals, the things that you want, you're not just getting punished sticking to it because you're losing ground from your goals. You're also getting punished because all the time, effort, attention, and money that you're putting into that thing is time, effort, attention, money that you can't put into another opportunity that would allow you to achieve your goals. And so I really want people, when they're supposed to switch to these other opportunities so they can get what they want out of their life.
Nice. Well, that nicely leads us into our final question. So we love to ask all of our guests the flourishing question. What's one lesson on flourishing that you'd love our listeners or viewers to walk away with, and a practical step for putting that lesson into action?
Okay. So I think that we've covered uncertainty really well, because my standard answer is embrace uncertainty, focus on what you have control over. That's going to lead you to more flourishing. Instead, because we've talked about it so much, I'm going to steal something from Laurie Santos. And Laurie Santos, I don't know if you've had her on, but she's amazing, the Happiness Lab. And I did a podcast with her where I was the interviewer. I was in your role. And she talks a lot about the things that can help you to lead a happier life. And one thing that she suggested really, really hit home with me, and it's something that I've implemented. It's incredibly practical and easy. So I have a dog that is my soulmate. I mean, besides my husband and my children, this dog is my dog soulmate. This is my dog soulmate. And I go hiking with him all the time. And prior to talking to Laurie Santos, I would often take calls on the hikes. I would listen to music. I would listen to podcasts while I was hiking. And post talking to Laurie Santos, I have a phone in my bag so I can map the trail, but it never comes out of my bag. And I don't have earbuds in. So, and this concludes some pretty long hikes. So I'll often do 8 to 10 mile hikes with my dog. And it is me, my dog, the outside, and nothing. And I have to tell you, that has had one of the biggest impacts on my happiness of anything that I've ever done.
Wow.
In terms of changing something. And I highly recommend it. There are little things that go along with that. When I'm at dinner with people, I don't have my phone sitting on the table, not even face down.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of in this category. But there's this very big thing that I think that nowadays people don't think they could actually do. Right? When I talk to people and I tell them I go on these very long hikes and I don't have my phone, they're like, aren't you bored? And I'm like, no, it's the most creative, thoughtful, peaceful, problem-solving time, right? It's really changed. It's really changed things for me. So I'm just going to pass that on as something that's been really big for me.
That's Awesome.
Right.
Yeah. And Nick hikes a lot. Do you do that, Nick?
I do. So we actually mentioned that you can see one of my lazy boys behind me laying on the bed here,
Yeah.
but that's because he's hiked the last 3 days. And so you just mentioned a series of benefits, the default mode activity, the kind of unplugging for a while, the idea generation, the physical exercise itself, right? But before we hit record, I mentioned the name Karen Rivich, who does resilience
Yeah.
training at Penn. She really, for me, helped popularize the phrase hunt the good stuff. And there's savoring walks, right?
Yeah.
They're intentionally withdrawn from tech or any potential distraction, maybe besides the dog, right? And it's not supposed to be a chore, but you're not just
No.
walking either. You're actually looking for beauty, right?
Yeah.
Trying to get a little bit better at seeing it in the small things. Because the opposite direction can occur as well. In fact, a couple episodes we're having Michael Easter on, who wrote The Comfort Crisis, and he walks through research where people, when they actually have fewer problems in their life, they don't stop identifying problems. They just find new ones to identify.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
me, part of what you're talking about is the inverse of that, right? I'm actually going to work on my ability to find good stuff and something that otherwise might seem kind of random or maybe boring for some people. I think it's a really important exercise. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'll sometimes go hiking with one of my daughters, and I have a no phone rule for her too, right? Like, because I
Mm,
do think that another thing is like real connection with other people. So my dog is a part of it because I'm connecting with him,
yep.
right? So I'm connecting with my daughter, and it's so funny that you say that because I find myself so often on those walks going, "Oh my gosh, can look at how beautiful this is,"
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
to her. Do you see how, look at this? This is so beautiful. Look at these trees. Look at these. And one thing I find that I really appreciate, I live in a place that really truly has four seasons, is that as the season starts to change, I'm so in it, right? Like when the leaves,
Yep.
look at how beautiful these leaves are that have fallen on the ground, right? Like I'm so living in that. And I was actually thinking on one of my walks about like Emerson and Thoreau, right? And I was like, when I was younger, I don't think I got it. And then, I'm out on this walk and I'm like, I get it. On Walden Pond, let's go. Right? Like
Wow.
I get it now. I like
Yeah.
completely understand what that was. And I wish that that was something, I guess when I was younger, we didn't have the phones all the time, so maybe it didn't feel as urgent to do that kind of thing because you sort of felt like you
Yeah.
were unplugged a lot more. But I wish that I had been doing this more a lot earlier.
Well, that's a wonderful, clear piece of practical advice for everyone to take away from this. To go on more savoring walks, to get away from technology and just savor the beauty that surrounds us
Yeah.
with a person or with a pet or with both. Love that. Thank you
Yeah.
so
Or
much,
by
Annie.
yourself.
As in one thing I love to do that makes me happy, or one lesson that I'd love our listeners to walk away with. One of those. Well, relatedly, something I love to do that brings me a lot of happiness is play pickleball. And I think the
Oh,
reason,
by the way, my second answer would be tennis.
right? Well, I think a
Yeah.
related reason for this, and I was thinking this as you were
Yeah.
talking, is that one of the reasons I love doing that is because you are away from technology when you're engaged in any sport. You
Yep.
just completely forget about it, and that enables you to lose yourself in the activity you're doing. This relates to getting into a flow state, or at least getting into a
Yeah.
high state of focus on something you love doing, be it hiking, being with loved ones, playing a sport of any kind. But getting away from technology is vital to that. It's one of
Yeah.
the great things about sports is that you can't be looking at your phone while you're playing. I can't think of a sport where you can be looking at your phone while you're doing the sport, right? And I think that's one of the things that enables sports to be great sources of getting into a flow state, or just things that bring us happiness and joy.
Oh, I completely agree. I just came from a tennis lesson. I'm about to go play more tennis this afternoon. It is a source of incredible joy for me, particularly, and you know this from pickleball, is that combination of connection to other people
Mm-hmm.
while playing sports,
Mm-hmm.
getting into that flow state I think that that's all really important too. Like, I think that in the world that we live in today, through technology and social media, we have an illusion of connection to other people. And finding that really deep connection that you get from playing doubles in pickleball or even singles across from somebody else, in tennis, right? Playing these kinds of sports, I think is so incredibly valuable. And I don't think that we get enough of it because I think that we think we're getting it,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not. We're not unless we're really present with the other people, in a way that where technology just isn't there.
Absolutely.
So I live that, every day. I also do like yoga and solid core, which also, has the phone put away and things like that. And it's something that I'm just really big on. And I think that it really helps it not just my happiness, but also the quality of my thinking, I think is really positively impacted from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, technology-free spaces where we can do something with other people that we love doing and get really lost in it, for sure. Now that I think about this, I think of playing music with other people in jams and in bands and stuff as well. But that's a whole other hour-long conversation we could go into another time. So before we wrap up here, Annie, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you want to mention? We've got your website and link stuff, but anything you want to give a shout out to here?
I've decided to finally start shouting this out. I haven't in the past, but so there's a platform called maven.com.
Maven.com.
Which is a direct to student cohort-based learning platform, and individual creators create courses. And I have a course on there called Effective Decision Making. And I have done nine cohorts so far, 9 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember.
Great.
It's 3 weeks. Monday and Wednesdays are class time. Tuesdays are office hours. I love the office hours because it's sort of like an AMA. They can ask me anything, or, how they're applying, the lessons in the class to their own lives, so on and so forth. It's 3 weeks. So 6 class sessions, 3 office hours. I just finished my last cohort actually last week. My new cohort is open starting at the end of April. And students seem to like it. And I decided I should start mentioning it because it brings me tremendous joy to teach that class. I love the students. There's actually an alumni group, which people join afterwards and continue to meet afterwards. And I'm a true believer that your decisions are the things you have control over. And so let's be really intentional and try to get, try to really improve that. So just want to mention that as something that where people, if they want to learn more from me, they can go check that class out. And then the other thing that I must mention is the Alliance for Decision Education. This is an organization that I co-founded, and we're trying to bring decision education. How do we become better decision makers and really skill people up in decision making in K through 12? So we spend a lot of time teaching kids things like calculus. And we think that we should be spending a lot more time teaching kids how to be great decision makers, particularly in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So we are a field builder, which means that we work in policy, we create curricula, we do research, both on validating what we're doing, as well as creating new tools for improving decision making. So we take really like a whole system approach to the problem. And we're trying to get decision education into every K through 12 classroom in the country and the world. So I hope people will go check that out. We have a pretty stellar academic advisory board, people like Phil Tetlock. Danny Kahneman was on it before he passed. Wow. Richard Thaler, Adam Grant, Katie Milkman. There's a lot, Michael Mobison, you can go check it out. There's a lot of people that are supporting our cause. So hopefully people can go learn more about us. And I host a podcast on there called the Decision Education Podcast if people want to dive more deeply into decision making and decision process.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, got all this in the show notes. Thank you so much, Annie Duke.
It's great.
For a great conversation. Great. This has been Decision Making and Knowing When to Walk Away with Dr. Annie Duke. Thank you for listening or watching.
Thanks so much for listening to Flourish FM. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and on all major social media platforms.
And if you visit our website, flourishfmpodcast.com, you can sign up to our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter. First newsletter of every month, we share a long-form blog, and every newsletter, every week, we share highlights from our previous episodes. Please hit subscribe on our website.